fellow Tamers and Digidestined, it's Mike, aka Sanaku from Overground, and welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to episode 5 of the Rainbow series, where today we're going to be covering the color yellow. Now, unfortunately, out of the box that we opened so far, we had not had the opportunity to pull all the pieces to a Lord Nightmon deck, so what you see in front of you is kind of a hodgepodge of 3 different deck ideas that have kind of come together and coalesced into some unholy super deck that I'm actually quite having a lot of fun with. And I don't necessarily want to call it Yellow Toolbox because that feels really disingenuous. So I'm just going to call it Yellow Good Stuff. It's just all the best cards right now and all the best kind of archetypes combined that Yellow can offer when we don't have the appropriate means to build a cohesive archetype. So what was kind of the best part of BT4 in Yellow? Well, that was War Greymon. What's supposed to be the best part of BT5? Well, that's going to be Lord Nightmon. But if you don't have all of one and you don't have all of other, put them together. What do you get? You get this. That's pretty much what it is. I'm going to run through it the best I can and make the most sense out of it as it makes sense in my brain, because the theory I had is that this is kind of like a full circle, complete resource management, in the sense that you can access your resource from your hand, from your field, and from your trash pile to have a constant stream of toolbox opportunities based on the situation at hand. So we're going to do something a little bit different with the deck list. We're actually going to start with the megas and work our way down in order for all of this to make sense. So obviously we're going to have the 2 Valder Arm. This is because the majority of our top end is going to be yellow, but we are playing 2 Mastamon, which is a purple Digimon, as you can see here as well. So let's start with the top end. So we've got 3 copies of War Greymon, 2 copies of Mastamon, and 2 copies of Lord Nightmon. The 2 copies of Lord Nightmon, again, is just because that's all I own, and as we've discussed previously, everything that we bring to the Rainbow series is always kind of our first drafts based on our initial card acquisitions, and then based on what we can buy, trade, or pick up down the road, that'll kind of upgrade our decks as we see fit and kind of increase their potency throughout the course of the format. And I was super excited to build a full-on Lord Nightmon deck, but unfortunately just didn't have the means. But yeah, so going again at the megas, basically the question becomes, what do you need? And the top end that you decide to evolve into will determine basically where that need is met. Do you need removal? Enter War Greymon. Do you need to bring something back from the trash that'll give you a very powerful effect or potentially close the game out? Enter Mastamon. Do you have that resource in your hand instead that could potentially close the game out or give you a specific resource to get you ahead? Enter Lord Nightmon. Basically, I wanted all of my megas to do something different based on where you were in your current game state, and kind of give you branching decision trees based on where your resources land and where your priority needs to be in terms of activating those resources. And when I say resources, I mean your level 3s and your level 4s specifically. Lord Nightmon interacts primarily with all your level 3s, whereas Mastamon interacts primarily with your 4s or below. And anything that evolves on top of an Anjouwomon can also interact with your primary level 3s. So your level 3s are pretty much your bread and butter of the deck, and they're going to be the ones that you're going to be bringing out the most out of all these free effects. So we'll talk about them near the end, and we'll talk about kind of what they bring to the table overall. In our ultimate lineup, we've got 4 of the Anjouwomon. This is the BT3 Anjouwomon that we all know and love. On Digivolve, gives something security -2, and then the inheritable, if we have 3 or less security, we get to play level 3 from our hand for free on attack declaration. That's going to be comboed with 3 copies of the War Growlmon. Again, this is the BT4 War Growlmon, and Digiburst 2. We get to reduce something by 4,000. And then the newest addition to the fray is 2 copies of Nightmon, where on play we get to reduce something by 4,000. And Nightmon's an additional target for us to drop off of Lord Nightmon, because not only can we drop a level 3 on attack declaration with her own effect, we can actually drop a warrior-type Digimon, and this is likely the best warrior Digimon, bar none, that goes with the remainder of the theme of this deck, I would argue. And then we're going to go on to the champions, which is 4 copies of Pitomon, 3 copies of Churimon, 2 copies of Unimon, and 2 copies of the Promogatomon. This is probably the best champion lineup for this version of the deck. Had I gone more heavily focused on Lord Nightmon, you might see something like Gladimon, for example, because that would give me more consistency in the warrior aspect of it all. But because that's not the main focus of the deck, we're just kind of going back to tried and true champions of old that have kind of never let us down, and kind of the basic bare bones crutch skeleton that you would see in a War Greymon deck of BT4 past. Gatomon specifically is here primarily for the Mastamon interaction, because you can bring it back off for effect, get a free recovery depending on where your security is, and then it'll act as an additional blocker if you have a purple Digimon in play. So all things considered, that gives us 8 quote-unquote blockers, and in a deck where we're going to be consistently burning our own life to make plays, we do need to make sure that we have more opportunities to give ourselves defense and protection to stay alive as long as possible. Now let's talk about the rookies, because they're kind of what brings this whole deck together and what kind of activates this entire theory. So not only does the top end worry about where you are in your game state and what resource you need and from where, the rookies are the resources themselves that kind of determine the pace in which how the game is going to be played, or determine the pace of any given turn. So Bushi Agumon is your game ender. So no matter where you are in your strategy, if you need Bushi to either take out an additional security or to end the game specifically, he's your man. He's going to be there, and he can be brought into play by multiple avenues in which he can just flat out completely finish the game. And bada boom, bada bang, he's done. Starmon is a new addition, and we touched upon Starmon in the previous Diaboromon video, and he is basically extra forms of removal. Now, you will notice that in the Mega lineup, we're not playing our old buddy Slash Angemon, and that's because his DP stat value is just so unreliable in this format. And although he is really good at removing things, and he combos really well with stuff like Nightmon, and even stuff like Starsmon, or Starmons rather, because there's an S at the end for some reason, his 8K DP is just never going to survive, and it's just so unreliable. So I wanted to make sure that all of my Megas were big enough or did other things to compensate for a weaker stat line. So Lord Nightmon can buff herself up even further for every Digimon that you have in play, and War Greymon has the potential to reduce something by 6K and potentially remove a threat at the same time that he's attacking. So Starmons is here to kind of take off the top what someone like War Greymon could not accomplish. And we're going to also talk about Pikmon here, because we have not talked about the babies yet. And because we're playing a full suite of 4 Pikmons, because every single one of our Megas potentially has an opportunity, if not by themselves, in combination with something like Angemon, to constantly increase our board size to a point where we hit that 3 or more threshold for Pikmon to trigger. So Pikmon, now in combination with War Greymon, now in combination with Starmons, and sometimes combination with Nightmon, kind of acts as one constant revolving removal package, because War Greymon plus Starmon combined plus a Pikmon will be upwards of 9,000 DP on their own, 6,000 from the War Greymon. Starmons will trigger for 2K more, or sorry, 10,000, because you need to have 3 in play for Starmon for the Pikmon to trigger. So you're basically reaching the same general heights that Slash Angemon would have given you regardless. It's just a more roundabout way, and it's not more of a direct just evolution one and done way. And then that also combos even further with something like War Growlmon, because if you can reduce something by 4,000 with War Growlmon, and then you attack with War Greymon, you can do something by 6,000 further. And we got into a lot of situations where something was like, 12,000 or something in previous formats, and you just couldn't get over it, and even the Koromon that you had as a baby couldn't kind of like take you over the edge there. Now Starmons will always make sure it takes you over the edge, because when you drop Starmons in combination with a War Greymon with an Angemon, for example, you're always going to have at least 2 Digimon in place. You're going to be able to take out an extra 2,000. So Starmons in combination with War Greymon alone, barring nothing else, will always at least take out 8,000 DP, which is pretty much the same thing that Slash was doing, while also being able to be a lot more aggressive, because with the War Greymon you have the potential to get the double swing on the restand, but you pick up the security, what in combination with the entire removal aspect as a whole. So that's kind of where Starmons comes into play. Starmons comes into play as well when you combo it with Lord Nightmon and Mastermon as well, because it acts as extra form of removals as you continue to widen your board. Next, we've got Pulsemon, and Pulsemon is here for the consistency part of it. Do you need to dig for a specific combo piece? Are you one memory shy of continuing on with your play? Well, this is where Pulse comes into play, because depending on where you are in your security stack, he can do one or the other. And then we've got our 2 recovery options, 1 copy of the Promo Patamon and 1 copy of Lucemon. We're playing one of each because they both come up in different scenarios. The Patamon specifically can be evolved into something else. So sometimes you might want to bring that off of Lord Nightmon or back from the trash with Mastermon if you plan on turning that into like a blocker, for example, or building up a new stack. So if you are at that security threshold where you can meet Patamon's requirements, which in this case would be 1 or less, that would be the option that you want to go to, and then you could follow up with the blocker, and that stops 2 attacks now, for example. Lucemon, on the other hand, is depending on where you are in your current game state and how aggressive you need to be. If you need to recover in order to ward off lethal, but you aren't necessarily at the threshold where the Promo Patamon would trigger, and then you would bring out Lucemon off of all of your myriad of effects instead. You would recover 1, and then on the next turn you have a 10k body to be a lot more aggressive with. In combination with all your DP reductions, you can reduce something to a certain extent, and then use Lucemon to run that over and have your other Digimon go after the security instead. So that's kind of how everything kind of comes together. It's one giant kind of ripple effect between every single level of Digimon as you reach the bottom from the top. And they all kind of serve a very specific purpose, and they all kind of come full circle. So no matter where you are in your game state, with this deck specifically, you should theoretically be able to answer your opponent in a very specific way, in a very consistent way as well. That's the theory. Whether it holds up in practice, I'm not 100% sure. I have played a couple test games with this deck so far shuffled, and honestly, the results were pretty fun. I had a big surprise, actually, in terms of how consistent this deck actually was. However, is pure Lord Nightmon or something like pure War Greymon into BT5 moving forward more consistent and more so the way to go? Absolutely. However, give this deck a shot as it is, and I recommend maybe fooling around with some of the ratios or seeing what you find. The Japanese metagame did not have this Promogatomon at the time of their BT5. So the fact that we have access to this in combination with something like Mastamon changes the dynamic a little bit for us. And I can actually see Mastamon decks becoming more popular than they were in Japan during this time frame because of that. And that's why Mastamon saw a lot of popularity in BT4 format as well as a partner to War Greymon. But enough about the Digimon as a whole. Let's finish talking about the deck. So rounding it off, we're playing 3 copies of TK, the boy himself. You cannot play a yellow deck without him. 2 copies of Spiral Masquerade. This is generally because yellow always had very shit security hits, and this is a better Javelin in the sense that it does more damage and does not care about your hand size. And in a deck where we're constantly building up our board wide in order to deal with our opponent's various threats and various, accoutrements, Spiral Masquerade helps us eliminate our opponent's threats for A, cheaper, and B, just bigger numbers, which I appreciate. And then finally, 2 copies of Blinding Ray, just to help us eke off the top if we need extra memory to do 1 clutch Digivolution or to make 1 clutch play. I don't want to play any more than 2 nowadays because, again, it's really shit to see in your security. And sometimes when you reveal it off a TK, you almost feel like you have to grab it, or otherwise you're not going to get any value out of it. And I found playing multiples is just super bricky. It is, don't get me wrong, it's a great card, especially when you're down to like 0 security and you chain them together, you can get a whopping ton of memory all in 1 turn. However, in the purposes of this deck specifically, and how fast the format is, I don't want to put myself in a risk of lethal if I just don't need to. So I'm wanting to keep Blinding Rays to a minimum so I can only use them for very clutch plays and make sure that every other card I have in my hand is playable and always online. Anyway, all this to say, this is episode 5, the penultimate episode of the Rainbow series, and I hope that this discussion on this yellow deck, I'm not sure what I'm even going to call it, I don't know what it's going to look like in the thumbnail, but I hope that this discussion made sense. This is the first draft that we're able to build based on our box openings thus far of BT5. Once we get more copies of cards in the future, this deck might change. However, I implore anyone watching this video, if you're watching this and you're raising an eyebrow like The Rock and you're like, what the hell is he talking about? I strongly encourage you to just give it a shot and let me know what you think, because I think this deck is way better than I'm actually giving it credit for. And it's a lot of fun. I like yellow. I've always loved yellow. It's one of my favorite colors in this game. And this version of it is just really neat, and it gives me more opportunities to kind of keep fleshing out the color instead of adhering to very strict archetypal structures. So I'm having a blast with it, and I really hope that you can too. But if you like what you saw here today, please leave a like on the video. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions about the video up to this point as well, please feel free to let me know in the comments below. But I have been Mike, aka Sinaku, once more. Have a good night, everybody, and we'll see you in the last and final episode of the Rainbow series.